that education. So thank you again. Thank you so much for coming and being with us today.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. So this program is facilitated by the County of San Diego. It's a program through Live Well San Diego, as Tosh mentioned. Black Tech Link, we support with workshop facilitation. Rise San Diego supports with marketing and outreach, and the Prep Institute manages the program and it administers the program and provides technical assistance, I believe, through your incubator program, correct, Natash?
Correct. Yes. And one-on-one coaching.
One-on-one coaching, correct? Wonderful. And so, as I mentioned, today's workshop series. So, last couple workshops we had focused on financial growth, and the next two workshops will focus on customer growth. And so, we're excited to have Alex Waters from Jacob Center. But before we begin, I wanted to share an upcoming opportunity as we are Live Well San Diego partners. Live Well San Diego has a couple of upcoming workshops that they're looking to provide for small businesses and nonprofits to also support their capacity, build their capacity. They have an upcoming workshop on June 5th called Building an Inclusive Workforce. And it has like a lot of great speakers, some breakout sessions, and definitely think this would be a great opportunity for any businesses that are looking to hire, build out their staff, employees, and just kind of grow in that area. And I'll be providing the link to that in the chat. So Alex, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So one, I'm happy to be here. So thank you for the opportunity. My name is Alex Waters. I'm currently the director of economic development at the Jacob Center for Neighborhood Innovation, where over the last several years we've run business programs in an early stage sort of business accelerator program that focus on all different kinds of businesses. So we've had everything from nonprofits to tech companies to small businesses to professional services, really helping them kind of grow and building other programs sort of along the way. And so that's a little bit about myself. My background, I've been an enterprise consultant. I've worked with nonprofits, helping them build and scale, spent about a decade in ed tech. So a little bit of information kind of all over the place, pulled together to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today.
Wonderful. And so kind of like to help you kind of gauge like who's in the audience, we always start with an initial question, and it's just also to kind of wake the audience up. So do have a quick survey to see if you all can, let's see, if y'all can take this quick survey, and I will put it in the chat. And please let me know if you received it okay. Okay. So this is just a basic question, as this workshop focuses on, customer growth, I want to hear from everyone to know, like, who are your biggest customers, and are those you provide a service to? You can write multiple answers just so Alex can kind of gauge like who our audience is and everything, who your audience is, who, your customers are, who you like your customers to be. Um, let's see. Stop my share for a moment. Wonderful. So I do see some responses coming in. Let me go ahead and reshare my screen. Wonderful. So Alex, can you see? So we have youth serving organizations, leaders, corporations, tech companies, BIPOC folks in crisis, African Americans. So you can see, wonderful. We're gonna give it a couple minutes and just let me know if you weren't able to receive the link, just let me know. But we definitely want to take this time to hear from you, to learn again, like who you see that your customers are, or would like your customers to be, or the people that you serve to be. Okay. Looks like there's no more answers, which is fine. Um,
I think there was a question that came in on the chat. Samara.
oh, I see it. Hi, Samara. If someone did not come to prior sessions, can they still sign up for the Project Most program? Absolutely. These are open exit workshops and they're meant to be, informative and kind of to meet everyone where they're at in their business operations, their business growth. So you're more than welcome to join any workshop. Our hope is that you join all of them if you can. We have a lot of great information and speakers, and the knowledge that they'll be dropping is definitely like instrumental in growing your business. But if you weren't able to join like previous workshops, we do have those recordings that will be made available. And so I know a lot of people join like or register for Project Most at different points. But we'll always do our best to like provide those recordings. And then we're working with our team internally to provide a space where we can provide all of those recordings to everyone. Thank you so much. Great. I would like to amplify this in other circles. Please share the registration link with me again. Will do.
And also, too, we will be sending out invitations to everyone to join Project Most Incubator for small business growth and nonprofit growth and the one-on-one consulting. We hope to get those invitations out by July and August this year.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to go back to sharing. All right. We're back on the main screen. Or can you see the presentation?
Not yet.
Oh, let me stop and share again. How's that?
Yes, you can see it.
All right. Well, Alex, I hope those responses were able to help curate the conversation for you today.
Yeah, really helpful. It's cool to see all the different areas that folks are kind of working in, and going through some of the processes is really good to have a kind of an understanding or an idea, at least a little bit around who your customer is and what are some of the kinds of things that you can be thinking about as you are preparing to work with them. So next slide, please. So just to kind of give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to go in. And as we're going through this, I like to have this kind of be, an interactive type thing. So if there are questions, you can either pop them in the chat, and then we can kind of make sure that we get those answers as we go along. So first, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the problem as a whole, right? And so why that's really important when you're thinking about who your customer is and how you're going to be operating. Who is the customer? We're going to dive in a little bit to talking about target marketing, like how do you figure out what your sort of opportunities are. And then the last piece, we'll kind of dive into a little bit around customer discovery. All right, next slide, please. So the most important thing, I think, for any, whether it's nonprofit, business, regardless of what your sort of vertical is in that, is that you want to make sure that you're very clear on what is the actual problem that drives you, right? What is the problem that you're aiming to solve? Because as many of you may have experienced, the solution will sometimes change given whatever the different kind of uh, sort of things are on the ground, or what they look like in the industry, or changing times. Like, but the problem in and of itself shouldn't change. All right. Next slide. So to really identify and make sure that you're very clear on what that is, you want to make sure that you go through a couple of different ones. And these are just some prime questions, right? So first off, what problem am I solving? Right? What are you actually aiming to do? Right? What is the challenge that you've seen, that you faced, whether it's a nonprofit sort of a community, whether it's a business and you're trying to provide services for your customers? Am I in love with the problem? Do you really actually enjoy dealing with this particular challenge or issue? Right? Because it's going to get tough. There are going to be challenges that pop up. And so you really have to make sure that you really care about solving this particular thing. Why is it important to solve this problem? Right? Who actually has this problem? How do you know people will pay to solve this problem? Now, for this one, sometimes I know for folks that are operating nonprofits, they're like, well, the people who have the problem aren't the ones that are paying me to solve it. And we'll talk a little bit of a distinction between obviously the user versus potentially a funder or a donor. But how do you know in that case that a donor is going to pay you to help you solve a problem for somebody else who might not be able to pay for it? And how do you actually know that they have this problem, right? What's your evidence that this is something that someone has that they're going to need to go move forward? Next slide. So in that, when you're really thinking about defining what the problem is, I always say it's the 3 C's, right? Your problem should be clear, concise, and compelling. You should be able to rattle it off very quickly as to what the issue is, tell somebody, and they should be like, oh, I understand that, and I want to sort of move to action. How big is this problem for the customer, right? So as you are thinking about this, is this a small challenge, a minor inconvenience, or is this a major thing that someone is really adamant about making sure that they get solved? How does this help them achieve their goals, right? A lot of times we don't think about it in terms of, oh, I have a customer or I have an individual who's going to be providing me capital to run a program. What are their goals around that, right? Because people only purchase things and give money for things for one of 2 reasons. They either are trying to gain something or they're trying to avoid the pain of something. So how big is this and how does this help them in that? And why haven't they already solved it? Right? This is something that sometimes people don't think about, where they're like, well, there's a great opportunity because no one's ever done it. And you may have to take a step back and say, well, why hasn't anybody ever done it? Is there something that I might be missing? Is there some challenge that I might be not thinking about or not thinking about in the right way? Or maybe people have, and because of certain factors or certain circumstances, they haven't actually been able to kind of keep over the hump and continue on, whether a business or a nonprofit. Next slide. So what I would love everyone to do right now is take a couple moments and really think about very clearly what is the problem that you're solving, right? Every business or nonprofit exists to solve a problem, period, right? So take a couple of minutes and think deeply about what that problem is you're solving. We won't take the full 5 minutes, but we'll take a couple of minutes, and then some folks can kind of potentially share out, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. And remember, I'm not asking you what you're doing or what the solution is. I'm asking just specifically what the problem is, right? And then you can write one sentence that just clearly states it, right? Some of you all may already have this, and that's fine. You can think about refining it a little bit, but then we'll kind of go from there. If you have a question or that's unclear, go ahead and type in the chat. I don't know if people can come off of mute or not, but you can type in the chat, and I'm happy to explain or clarify a little bit. So why don't you take about a minute or so and kind of start going through that and just write it down, or if you're on your computer, you can type it out, just so that you have a real clear thing. And then we'll have a couple people potentially share what theirs are, and I can give a little bit of feedback around it. Okay, give another moment or two. Okay. Almost Black Tech is trying to solve the problem of lack of Black representation in STEM fields. Okay, great, great. Liberation Through Arts addresses the lack of accessible arts and health resources for marginalized Black communities in San Diego. Okay, aiming to foster cultural connection, personal growth, and community well-being through creative expression. Okay, so it's like being very clear about what that is, what is the actual problem. Nature Unplugged is tackling the youth mental health crisis. Okay, so for some of these are very sort of specific. And what I would say is, especially for the other one, if I can give a little bit of feedback on it, for Sonia. Okay, so Nature Unplugged is tackling the youth mental health crisis, but specifically, like, what does that mean, right? Is there some specific kind of thing? So that's a problem, but is there a part of that that's kind of unpacked, right? Because you want to make sure then, as we get a little bit further down the line, that the customer or the individual or the organization that's going to provide you with funding or anything like that is super targeted and very clear in understanding exactly what you're going to wind up doing. Okay. So any questions about this before we move forward, right? And others, I encourage you to go ahead and share as well, if you can, in the chat, or if you want to use the question feature, I believe that's an option as well. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide and the next piece, and talk a little bit about the customer. Okay, smart. Leaders being equipped to provide the space for others who are different than them to meaningfully participate in decision making. Okay, so that's the problem and that's the challenge, right? That there aren't leaders who have the opportunity for space for others. Okay, very cool. All right, can you get to the next slide? So now we're going to really talk a little bit about just the customer as a whole, right? And like, who is the customer? And a couple of ideas to kind of think through to really deeply have a firm sort of understanding around, right? And understanding your customer all starts with empathy, right? What are their challenges? What are their issues? What are their concerns? What are the kinds of things that they might need? What are their pains? Next slide, please. And so while you may be working with a particular customer or population, what I want everyone to do is kind of think about, okay, well, who is the ideal individual, group, community that you're aiming to work with, right? And in this, these are just some questions to kind of prime people to really dig a little bit deeper, right? So what are their problems, challenges, right? Where do they hang out? Where would you find them, right? Where are they on a, if you have an ideal customer or an ideal person you're working with on a Tuesday night at 5 p.m., where would you find them, right? What are they doing? What are they experiencing, right? What are the unique attributes, right? We've had a couple of people talk a little bit about specific communities or specific industries that they're focusing on. Okay, so then you take another step. It's like, well, what's unique about them specifically that makes them fit into the bucket with which you are aiming to help and solve a problem for? What do they need, right? And lastly, what are their goals or aspirations? What are they trying to achieve by using your product and or service, right? They're coming to you to say, hey, I want to get somewhere. I have some goal about what I want to accomplish. And through what you are going to provide, that is going to allow for me to get there, right? But what are their goals? What is the next phase or the next place that they want to be? Because a lot of times when we are actually engaging with things or interacting with things, it's aspirational, right? We are using a service or a program as a tool to get to the next place to where we actually want to be. And so you need to make sure that you really have a firm understanding of not just how you're going to help them, but where is it that they are actually aiming to get to? Because that helps you create and really kind of hone in on what are the most important things that someone might want or someone might need. Okay? And so we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here that I want to sort of share. You can go to the next slide. So a lot of times we typically tend to think about customers as sort of as this external force, right? Externally to me, but we really don't think about ourselves and what it means for us to. Yes, Vanessa, we'll send out the PowerPoint after. We really don't think about ourselves and how we are impacted and the decisions that we make and why things work well for us, right? And so this is just a key example of an actual product that I purchased a while ago, right? But there's specific reasons as to why it connects well, right? So I'm going to go through this really quickly and tell a little bit about it, and then I'm going to have people pause for a second and think about it as it relates to them and what they're doing, right? So for me, this was an electric tea kettle, right? A company made it, Kasori, right, which I think is an Amazon brand kind of company. And then you start diving into, okay, well, why did I purchase the product? Well, I purchased the product because at the time I was making tea and I got a little bit tired of boiling it just on my stove, so I needed an electric tea kettle. What were some of the things that I was looking to get from the purchase, right? Well, I wanted something nicer, kind of in my kitchen, something that looked kind of cool. I thought it looked fine. And what's unique about me, my background or lived experience that made it a great fit for what I was looking for. So I do pour over coffee, right? I like pour over coffee. And I was trying to get healthier, so get away from as much coffee. And so I thought tea would be a kind of a cool thing to be able to do. What's unique about me, desires, goals that made it a great fit, right? So I already talked about, I wanted it to look visually appealing. But for me, I kind of think of myself as sort of a tinkerer, right? I like to, modify things. I like to get things in sort of a certain order. So this was an opportunity, right? On the front of it, it's got these different, temperature settings, which I didn't know at the time that tea is supposed to be brewed at different temperature settings. But that to me was like, oh, this is actually really cool because for me, I can play around with it and it makes it a better experience. And why didn't I think I could find it before? Well, initially I was looking for something that was less expensive, and I was like, well, but it didn't have all of these things kind of clustered together, right? And so when you put the product in front of a person like myself, it's like, that's perfect. That is what I want, even though I didn't know that that was the thing that I was going to buy before I went through the whole process. And so what I want people to start thinking about are these sort of not just first layer, but secondary layer and tertiary layer types of things as it relates to your customer, right? Now, whether that is, again, somebody who is buying your product or service, or even from a donor standpoint, if you're a nonprofit or a funder granting standpoint, what are the really specific, unique things that make what you are actually providing to them feel heavily curated, even though they may not be? All right. So you go to the next slide, please. All right. So now what I want you to do is I've given you my story about this particular product, right? What I want you to do now is take a couple minutes to think about the last product or service that really resonated with you, right? And I don't mean that it was just like, oh, that's kind of cool. I mean that you ran to tell other people about, that you were excited to share, whether it's online or with friends and family or other members of your community. What was the last thing that you experienced that you were like, this really speaks to me deeply? All right. And then after that, you're going to think about, well, what was it? What was that product or service? Right. And why did it connect with you? Right. Not why they said it did, not what they put on the advertisement. Right. What was it that actually really spoke to you in a real deep and personal way? And after you've done that, you take a moment to think about it. Then you can write down 3 things about you as an individual, right? Your life, your story, your lived experience that made this particular service or product an incredible fit. All right. And so we'll give you about 2 minutes to do that. And then hopefully some folks will be able to share in the chat about what that was for them. Because what I want to do is I want to make sure that people are really personalizing this, because everything that you push out into the world in terms of a product or a service, you needed to connect directly with the individuals who are going to be purchasing it from you, right? And if you don't, then you have a little bit of a mismatch, right? So as you're going through that, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can just pop them in the chat or use the question feature. Give another little minute, and then folks can go ahead and start sharing in the chat, right? Because I want to make sure that people really, like I said, think deeply about this, and they can kind of identify what are those things that make the product or service that really resonated with you hyper personal. Like, what was it about it that really connected in a very deep way? Okay. So the last product that I really resonated was Experian.com. Okay. I've been trying to improve my credit. Experian has been great in helping me stay on top of it. My hope is to purchase a home. Okay. Awesome. Really cool. And you can see in that, like, there's specific things, right? Like, there was an aspirational piece, right? Which is wanting to get to purchase a home, and how does this tool help me be able to do that, right? And so that's great, right? And I think that sometimes when we use products or we use services, we're just kind of in the motion. Life is busy. We're doing a bunch of stuff. When we really stop to think about it, like, what is it about where you are right now that then makes it a really good fit, right? If it was 5 years from now, it might not be. If it was 5 years before, it might not have been, right? But right now, in this moment, how does that work? So if other folks want to share, it'd be great, and we can kind of go through them. Okay. Product. From Noel, artisanal ice cream. Okay. You're an artist and like products that are innovative and creative. Okay. I'm an outgoing person. Everyone that worked there was friendly and outgoing. Okay. The aesthetic was a shop, nice, and I like aesthetics. Yeah. No, ice cream works. It's a product, right? But even in that, like, there's very specific things about you that then made that a really good fit, right? You enjoy the interaction, you like artisanal products, right? Like, and the aesthetics of this physical space was something that brought you into it, right? That's great, because if somebody else was just like, actually, I just like to sit at home and eat ice cream and watch a movie, then it might not resonate in the same kind of way, right? And so again, really deeply thinking about this is really, really, really important as we get into the next phase, which is really talking about the market, right? Okay, Sonia. All right, we want to use specific plug-in hybrid minivan. Okay, I rave about everyone. I'm a new mom, and it was practical, functional. Okay, it's interested in sustainability, environmental impact, and I love that it had luxury touches and was flexible in how you could use it. Great, right? And when you think about it, it's like there are very, very specific things that are laid out in there, right? You're like, I'm a new mom, right? It was practical and functional. You're a person who's concerned about the environment, right? And then you said you loved that it had luxury touches, right? So all of those things speak to who you are as a person, not just what the product offers, right? Because if they would have told you that it offered other things, that might not have been as appealing. And so how do we curate and cultivate that as we are thinking about customers in the broadest sense possible, so that we really, really connect with them? All right, I'll give it another moment if anybody else wants to pop in anything into the chat, and then we'll go on to sort of the next piece. Okay, Vanessa. Well, I mean, it could be that you haven't been experiencing, at least at this particular moment, products that are really resonating with you, right? It doesn't mean that you don't still, purchase things or buy things, right? Um, but yeah, I would think a little bit about that in terms of what are the products and what are the services and like really you give a 10 out of 10 to, right? Because for you and what you're providing, you want your individuals who you're providing your customer or your sort of product or service to say that you're a 10 out of 10, right? That when they walk away from what you're doing, you're providing that thing that they can't help but talk to other people about. And so, yeah, take some time. And like I said, you get these exercises. So I encourage folks to do it. I know it's a little bit on the spot, so that can be a little challenging. But it's really good. Okay. I like to save money and I buy professional clothing at Costco. Okay. It's cost effective and lasts long. Quality and customer service of being able to return it if not a good fit. Great. Right. Again, when you really start to think about it, there's some very specific kinds of things, right, about you that make that a really good fit. Right. It's cost effective, lasts long, it's quality. You really like the customer service and you like to be able to take it back if you don't like it and it's not a great fit. Those are all really important things for folks. Okay. So thanks everybody for sharing. I appreciate it. And again, I encourage folks to kind of go through this and take some time as they're walking through some of the pieces so that they can really kind of think through how they are also making it so that their customers are looking at them as like a 10 out of 10. All right. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. So now we're going to kind of shift a little bit and talk about sort of market sizing, right? Because what happens is if you've kind of thought about the problem you're solving in your customer, now really thinking about, okay, well, what is the actual opportunity that I have that's in front of me to be able to get in front of those individuals that I want to provide value to and I want to provide my product or services to, right? So the first step in finding this eyes in the market is to define what market you're actually operating, right? So we sometimes can use, big terms like I'm a nonprofit. Okay. But inside of that nonprofit, like what is the space that you're actually operating in, right? Because you're not operating in the space of all nonprofits, right? There's something specific that you do. And so you want to really get granular in thinking about that, right? So that you can make these calculations and understand what actually are the opportunities for you from either a fundraising perspective or just the amount of customers, if you're a business, that you're actually going to be able to attract to you, right? So asking yourself, who is the actual buyer of this product or service? Who's the user of this product or service? And I make that distinction on purpose because oftentimes the buyer is not always the user. And that happens with all different kinds of products and services, right? A great example, if you're a nonprofit, obviously, if somebody is giving you a grant to provide a service to somebody else who's not paying you, then you have a user and you have a buyer, right? Same thing if you're a parent and you're purchasing something for your kids, right? Kids might love it and use it every day, but the kid does not actually have the money to go into the store and purchase it, right? And so you have to be aware of each of those and who falls into what. And then what is the scope of my market, right? Is it geographical? What are the demographics of the individuals that might be in my market? And so really taking the time to think through some of these so that you have a better understanding of it, right? And so we go to the next slide. So I hope that this kind of brings it home a little bit. And so I tried a little bit of a different analogy as it relates to market sizing, right? Because what happens is a lot of times folks will go and they'll see stuff that'll say stuff, well, what's your total addressable market? What's your serviceable market? And people can get kind of lost in some of those pieces, right? So if you think about it in this way, there's what we call the TAM, right? Which is the total available market. There's the SAM, serviceable available market, and there's the SOM, serviceable obtainable market, right? Now, I use this like again in a travel analogy. So if you were thinking about places to travel all around the globe, right? And there's what are all of the possible options? That is really what your TAM is, right? So you think of it as like if I was going to go anywhere on the globe, then the globe is my total sort of available market, right? Then, okay, now I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'm going to think of a specific area based on sort of my preferences, right? That fits more or less, right? That's the serviceable available market, right? So in this case, if I was going around the entire globe, okay, I picked a smaller subsection of that, which is a continent, in this case, Africa. And then my serviceable obtainable market is based on my resources and what I can realistically do, then what can I actually provide or what can I get? And in this case, it was just picked out sort of Algeria, right? So if you go through those processes and you think about it as getting smaller and smaller and smaller, that's how to kind of think about when you're hearing of people say like these market sizes, right? So if you ever look at something and you see it's $1 trillion market, but what happens is it shrinks down to smaller pieces because a person or a company or an organization is never normally going to get 100% on any particular market. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second and see if there's any questions. You can pop them into the chat. We're going to walk through a couple of examples, but I want to make sure that this part at least is kind of clear for folks as they're thinking about market and market sizing. Okay, it looks like I don't think anybody had any questions. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And this is normally how you will see kind of these charts, right? Or graphs, or you'll see sort of like layered around, right? And so again, there's a total available market. And this is sort of the global demand for a product or service. It shows a lot of the potentiality of the scale of what your opportunity is. All right. Then you drop down to your serviceable available market. And this is what proportion of the market that fits your specific product offerings, right? And then the last one is of that specific product market market that you can sort of have for your offerings. How much of it can you actually get, right? And that has to deal with sort of existing resources and infrastructure, right? For you as an organization or a company. All right. So let's go to the next slide. All right. So there's kind of two approaches to figuring out what are those sort of top numbers, right? And so there's the bottom up approach and there's a top down approach. All right. Now, again, you'll get the slides to be able to go through and take a look at these, but I want to walk through how folks kind of come to some of those numbers, right? Because sometimes you can see these numbers, you're like, where did somebody get that there's this massive opportunity in the space? Or if somebody asks me, well, how many people are there, or what's the potentiality of you getting this number of customers or people, right? You want to be able to have a really good understanding of what that is so that you can answer those questions, right? So this is an example of if you're going to do the bottom up approach. It starts with information around customers and then works its way up to getting the larger number, which is the market size, right? So in this example I have here is if you were in the market specifically for donors or dollars from philanthropists for a STEM education program, right? As it relates to foundations. What you would do to get the total number and what your market size is you would say, okay, this is the number of foundations multiplied by the average amount given by each foundation every year for STEM education, right? And then you would get the total philanthropic dollars for STEM education, right? And now, for most of these, they're not concrete. They don't have to be 100% sort of accurate, but it gives you an idea of, okay, well, is the market large? Is it small, right? If we take an example, if there are 10 foundations, right? Let's say in your local area, and the average amount they give per year is $10 per year, okay, for STEM education. So you have 10 foundations, each of them give $10. And now you have $100 that are the total philanthropic sort of space for STEM education, right? Now I'm going to pause for a second. Does that make sense? And if I can get people to give like a thumbs up in the chat or can type in a question, because I want to make sure that people have a real kind of feel for what I'm talking about here, because there's a couple other examples, but I don't want to leave anybody behind. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Well, okay, great. Awesome. Okay. So now let's go to the next slide. And this was a little bit different, right? So this one is kind of a top-down approach, right? Which is you take the top line number and then you just basically work backwards, right? So in this example, you would take the total size of an industry or total size of the number of products or services, right? You multiply that times what you think you can get as the sort of target share of that market, and that gives you the market size, right? So in this example, I put down, if you were selling electric bikes, right? So you're selling electric bikes in San Diego, and there's a total overall of $75 million of bikes sold, right? Well, we know that the bikes sold are not all electric bikes, right? And so your market that you might be targeting, if you're selling electric bikes, you know that only 15% of all the bikes that were sold were electric bikes. So now you're really looking at, it's not $75 million is the opportunity. It's really 11.5 million, right? Because you've made that subsection and you've made a subset of the total amount, right? And that's really important because you want to make sure that you're clear as to what the possibility is. Sometimes people will say, well, there's $1 billion that's given away in philanthropy, or the education is a $7 trillion business, economy. It's like, well, that might be true, but then there's all these smaller subsections that don't relate to you, right? Because the education industry also includes textbooks, it includes furniture for schools, it includes all of these different kinds of things that are underneath the umbrella. And so if you can really make sure that you're very clear about what winds up happening and how it works, that's really, really important. Okay. Any questions about the top-down approach? Okay. All right. So now I'm going to give a couple of examples from some actual sort of product and services and kind of walk through kind of what it looks like. So if I can go to the next slide. All right. So for those who are old enough, like myself, to remember sort of the iPod, this is sort of an example that I think is a really good one because it kind of breaks down what people are sort of thinking about, right? So Apple is going to enter into this marketplace. They're going to make this device for music, right? For people who love music. So when you think about the total available market, right? The total available market is all types of portable music players, right? So there's a question in there. This involves some research according to your product. Yes. So it will involve doing that. You can do Google searches and things like that'll pop up information for folks that are attached to other orgs or like an SBDC or something like that. Sometimes they have market research that you can get information on how much is in a particular industry or how much is in a particular space. And again, it's to give you, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? But it's to give you an idea of what is the possibility and what's available out there for me. So back to sort of the iPod example. So the total available market is like all types of portable music players. Now you notice I didn't say all music players, right? Because in this case, if you're creating a portable product, you're not really competing with the high-end stereo that sits in someone's house, right? You're competing with other things that people use on the go. All right, so that's the first part. Then you shrink down again. In this case of the iPod, it's an actual digital music player, right? So it's not a CD player, it's not a tape deck, it's a digital music player. So there's an even smaller version of that because at this point it requires you to have a computer, It requires you to in the beginning, sort of like not as much at the beginning, but as they move forward, sort of internet connection, all these kinds of things. So if you're a person that says, I love portable music, but I don't want to have to attach it to my computer, you are not the customer for an iPod, right? Because there's certain criteria that are around it. And then the serviceable, obtainable market is that when you think and when they thought about, well, given what we have, what our infrastructure is, what our resources are, how much of the market do we think that we can actually get? And in this case, it might be 20%. Now, it wound up being substantially more than that, right? Because at the time, they kind of had a large portion of the actual sort of digital music player market. But that takes into account their partnerships, their ability to produce products, their marketing, like all of these things clustered in together to say, okay, well, how much do we actually think of the market that we can actually reach, right? And then you can benchmark against that, right? But it makes sure that you're taking into account these things, and the numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller. All right. Can we go to the next slide? All right. So this is a example if you were doing a sort of a STEM education program, right? And so the total available market might be grant providing foundations, right? Like, so the whole world of entities that provide grants, right? But then you have to shrink down okay, well, foundations that provide STEM education grants. It's like, oh, okay, well, then that's much smaller. And that's sort of what we do and where we are of what we can possibly get. And then when you move to the next phase of your obtainable, serviceable, attainable market, okay, well, you might only be able to really address 10% of those grants that come from foundations providing STEM education grants, right? Because of the resources and the infrastructure that you have available to you, right? And this is one I want to pause for a second on, because especially for a lot of nonprofits, they might get a little bit frustrated, especially as they're thinking about their customer and donors and foundations, because they say, oh, well, I provide, after school education programs. Well, that's great, but like, what is the scale and the scope of what you can do? Because you may not necessarily fit into different areas. I think recently, and I hope I don't get the numbers wrong, but I know with the huge program with Kinsey Scott, like giving away $1 million to all these different orgs. Well, the caveat in that, at least initially, was that they had to be around for a certain period of time and they had to be making over a certain amount of money. I think it was over $500,000 to $1 million at minimum coming into the organization, right? So if you are a nonprofit and you are applying for that and you don't meet that criteria, then like you're not, like that's not actually obtainable or available to you, right? So that's a big thing that kind of pops up, and I want to make sure that folks get that. So then you can really craft and hone in on who are the individuals that I'm going to be reaching out to, what are the foundations that I'm going to be going to, and you make a better use of your time because you're finding the customers that actually are interested in what you are actually providing and what your service is. All right. So I'm going to pause here for a second before we start getting into thinking about how do you get around customers and how do you observe some particular things, and then have a little exercise for folks to do around their actual market, because I want to walk people through what that looks like. Do you have any specific sites to go to do this research? So it depends on what industry you're in and what space you're in, right? So first I would start, honestly, with most of all of these, a Google search, right? You can Google search, if you're doing 4 products, right? Like, the number of, the car industry, right? What is the car industry in the United States of America, right? What's the market size? And then you can find some information details around that. If you are for nonprofits, sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging, but you can get research and data from things like Candid and some other sort of spaces as well. But then also we'll talk about it in a bit as we get to thinking about how to get information from potential customers. Is you'll get a lot of places where you get that research and details from talking to individuals who are industry experts, right? So talking to people who are at foundations, it's like, okay, well, where does the information or detail or reports kind of come out for you to be able to have that? So in short, yes, there are specific places you can go, but it's going to be different for everyone depending upon what actually their product or service is. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so one of the things is as you start to think about this and you're thinking about your market size, and I'm just gonna sort of throw this out now, we'll talk about it a little bit as well. But the key thing, and kind of going back to some pieces of like research, it's like you want to know these types of things. Where do people shop? If you're a nonprofit, where do they donate to? How often do they donate to? What are they actually purchasing, right? Where do they volunteer? What do they fund, right? These are all sort of observable things that you can get to that we'll talk a little bit about in a moment when we start digging into kind of customer discovery. But even when you're thinking about sort of your market and what the market dictates, like these are also really important questions to have in the back of your head around trying to find out like who is that individual or group that are in a market that I can kind of tap into. All right. So next slide, please. All right. So we have an hour left, so we're not going to go through the full 10 minutes on here, but I put the times in here because I hope that afterwards and people get the sort of the PowerPoint that they'll actually spend some time kind of going through these. But right now I want folks to really think about, okay, what do you know about the size of the market you are seeking to enter? Or if you are already providing services, what do you actually know about the size of the actual market and dollars that are flowing through it right now, right? So I want you to go ahead and start to think about that. And then also thinking about, okay, well, what other organizations are actually selling inside of the market, right? If you're a nonprofit, what other individuals are applying for grants or providing those services or doing the same thing that you are doing, right? In the marketplace that you have determined that you want to operate in. All right. And then either on your computer or on a piece of paper, write down what you know and what you don't know. Right. So one side is known, one side is unknowns, right? So what do you know about the market that you're entering into, right? Do you know the size of the market, right? Do you know the major players that are in the market? Do you know the average amount that the owners are giving in the market? Or do you know how many customers are in it? Do you know how it's growing? Like all of these things are really important to know over time because it's going to position you well to make sure that you are sustaining either your business or your nonprofit, right? I know someone mentioned before when they were going through that they were working for youth mental health, right? Since the pandemic, that has been a very large concern, right? And you see a lot of foundations. I work in the nonprofit space, so you see a lot of foundations that are moving a lot of money into that. You see a lot of individualized donors. You see a lot of municipalities, right? And so you might know that it seems like people are moving in that direction, but you want to be able to quantify like how many dollars, how many resources are actually moving there, because that helps you determine, well, what is the viability and how can I make sure that I'm applying for all of these individualized grants, or that it looks like there's going to be an increase over the next several years in this particular area. All right. So it's not to say that you have to know everything right now, but really taking an inventory of like how well versed are you and what's actually happening in the space that you're operating. All right. So take a couple moments and kind of go through some of those. Hope you do a little bit while I was talking about them. And then if folks want to kind of share out, if there are any sort of unknowns or people are curious about like where do you find stuff, go ahead and pop it into the chat. And I'm happy to answer as we're going along. No to all. That's what we do is unique and trademarked. no to all of the knowing about the size of the market or the organization selling in the market? Okay. So even if you're unique and trademarked, right? So that's perfectly fine and that's great, right? It's good to protect your assets and make sure that you're all set. Um, but then my question to you would be then, how do you know that you are uh, positioned well to be sustainable long term, right? Yeah, so it's a great question. The house movie, do you zero in on youth mental health or keep it broader for supporting healthy, thriving kids? I think it really depends on what is the service that you're sort of aiming to provide, right? Um, because supporting healthy, thriving kids, it could be a lot of different things, right? And maybe you have a larger cluster, but you know, uh, what is it specifically that you're doing? Now, while that might be the mission, you may say, well, actually, we support healthy, thriving kids by ensuring that their mental health is in a positive space, right? But I would try to get as specific as possible because at the end of the day, and I know it seems counterintuitive, especially sort of in the nonprofit space, um, you want to make sure that people know who it's not for, right? So that you don't kind of spin your wheels or apply for things and you find out that, well, I thought you were doing something else and this doesn't seem like something that I would want to fund. So Vanessa, yes. So really, as you think about who your market is going to be the market of whether it's funders, whether that's foundations, or if you have individualized donors, right? But you want to kind of get kind of a little bit more kind of specific. So which particular kinds of funders, right? Who are the funders that want to support what your cause is? And how do you make sure that you are making it clear to them? Okay, we had a couple more questions. I know all of them, but I struggle with access to the market in light of anti-diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and reduction of spending, and learning development coaching. Yeah, I mean, look, there are real challenges, there are real barriers that come up as it relates to reductions in spending in areas and in some critical areas that really impact communities. What I would say is then what might be interesting is, okay, well then now is a recalibration of finding out, okay, well, who are these individuals that are still supporting those initiatives that I want to work with? Since we get stuck in the tech leads for everyone, but we have most successfully being specific with youth mental health. Okay, yeah. So for Sonia, like it's a really great point, right? Because you have to think about it too. Like the donors themselves, they also want to be able to be very specific in where their dollars are going, right? And this kind of full circle back around to what I was talking about before, where it's like if you have a product or service that is very tailor made, then when you really hit on who it's for, they're excited to not only provide, but also to tell other people about it because it does the thing that they actually really wanted to do. And I'll be honest, I've been on both sides of the coin, right? Of, hey, you do a project and it's going great and you got donors that like really love it. And I've sat in rooms across from donors and be like, this isn't what I thought you were going to do. And so sometimes it can be challenging, right? And I definitely get that and I understand that part of it. Okay. Any other questions about the marketing sizing? And then if not, we'll move on to talking about how do you start to collect some of this information. Some people mentioned research, but I want to talk about a different kind of way of thinking about doing research in terms of customers and getting information back from customer discovery and interviews. Okay, we'll go ahead on to the next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about customer discovery, one of the things that people say, okay, well, what is that? You know, you might hear it come up. but really it's about talking to customers or people who, buy your product or service to learn a lot of information about them, right? I talked before, it's like, what are their pains, what are their aspirations, what is their current situation? And by talking to them, you'll find out what is real for them, what do they need, and then what problem are you solving that they actually want to buy as a customer for a business, or that they want to fund as a donor or a foundation, right? And there's a couple different ways to kind of think about this and make sure you do. The customer interview, asking questions, right, versus seeking answers. And we'll talk about that as I go through a little bit of some of the examples. And then how do you incorporate that feedback into the service, or if you have a product design that you want to make sure that that gets back into it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so first, before we get into talking about customer discovery and some of the interviews, I want to talk about who you should not interview. All right, avoid family and friends, primarily not because they don't want to help, but they're least likely to give you just really blunt and harsh, honest answers about it. Because it can be sometimes tough if you say, hey, this is, I have some questions about this, or I'm thinking about doing this. A lot of times people want to be supportive. But again, they're least likely to kind of be completely honest about the challenges they may be facing or the issues that they are kind of going through because they want to be supportive. People outside of the customer or donor profile, right? And this is very, very important, because I might say, hey, go talk to some people who fit your ideal customer profile. And then someone says, well, I can't find them, so I'm just going to talk to somebody who I think is kind of around what they do. And what happens sometimes, people get false positives. They get information that they feel is like great information, but it doesn't actually fit, right? If you are doing a program for youth, right, and you primarily want to get parents to sign their kids up for, let's say, a youth sports program, right? Talking to someone who doesn't have kids and doesn't plan to have kids about how what you could do could be transformative for youth is not necessarily going to be the best thing, right? The same thing if you talk to a donor who funds, maybe they fund after school programs, right? But you have a program that is going to be helping individuals with food insecurity. Now, both are really important, but if I'm a donor and I don't fund those kinds of things, it's like you interviewing me to get my information about what I actually do or what are the challenges of faith. Like, it may not necessarily be helpful, right? And then the last one is close sort of business colleagues and sort of professional contacts and associations. Now, the same thing is with sort of family and friends. Sometimes they're less likely to give you sort of really harsh kind of critique or information back, only because, they know you and they don't want to sort of be rude or mean. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So I say go out and do interviews, right? And so a lot of times people say, it's like, okay, Alex, I'm going to go do interviews. Like, but what in the world am I supposed to be doing with these interviews? And how am I supposed to be doing these interviews, right? And so there's quite a few that pop up. And I see, actually, my apologies, there's a little bit of an error in here. The first one is actually an in-person interview. And so the in-person interview is really designed and structured and set up to make sure that you can be across from a person, right? So you can focus without distractions. You can actually sort of see their body language as you're asking them questions about what their experiences are. And we're going to get to the questions in a moment of, like, you're really trying to draw out stories about what their experience is, right? Like, what are the things that they do? What do they don't do? You can make sure that the environment is a certain kind of way. But I'll be honest, like, they're hard to schedule sometimes. People don't want to necessarily meet in person. And they initially can be a little bit awkward and challenging for folks when people try to schedule them. The second one are video interviews, right? So if you can't do the in-person interview, then a video interview is the next best thing, right? We're on Zoom right now. You can structure these and set them up. And they're better because you can get sort of the visual facial expressions, right? You can focus more than sometimes a phone interview, which we'll talk about in a moment. But normally they're a little bit shorter because people aren't likely to sort of sit on a Zoom call with you for a longer period of time. And then also it's hard to create comfort on camera, right? And so you have to make sure that you take a few steps to really kind of unpack and lay out, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to sort of build rapport with individuals. The first is in-person interviews. The second are video interviews. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now we get to the phone interview, right? So phone is kind of the third on the list, right? And you can determine kind of tonality. And so you won't be able to see body language, obviously, but you can tell if you ask a question and somebody's kind of thinking about it, or they answer sort of abruptly, or those kinds of things. They are, in a lot of cases, more comfortable than in-person or video interviews, right? Because people, can be at home, they could be wherever they are, and people can schedule them quickly. The challenge with phone interviews, this is the one thing that I really want to make sure that people kind of have and think about. If you schedule a phone interview to talk to someone about their experience and really get information about their problem or challenges, you really have to make sure that they are focused, right? Because people will do things while they're driving, washing the dishes, tending to their kids, like all these different kinds of things while they're on the phone. And a lot of times we don't think about it. But if you are actually wanting someone to focus and give you a lot of information that you're going to use to then make sure that you are providing a certain service, or you are changing or modifying anything, you got to make sure that from that standpoint, that they're really focused on what you're talking about. The next one is an online survey. And an online survey, a lot of times what winds up happening is I might say, hey, go do some customer interviews, get some feedback. And people say, okay, great. I'm going to create a Google form and I'm going to send out a bunch of questions to people and they're going to give me all this information back. The challenge with that is, while it can be beneficial and you can reach a larger audience and it's easier, you really don't get a lot of text back in terms of people really elaborating on things. I don't know about you, but I get surveys all the time. And so the likelihood of people responding to the survey is actually pretty low. And if you get any more than really 3 or 4 questions, people are kind of like, I'm not answering a 45 question survey of my experience in the nonprofit space, right? It just is unlikely to happen. And then if something is interesting, and let's say somebody did write down something that's pretty cool, you still have to follow up with them afterwards, right? So you might have to track them down to get clarification or more details about it, which can be a little bit challenging. All right, next slide, please. Okay, these are the last two. One is environment observing. And so this one, while a little bit harder and you have to figure out kind of what you're actually looking for, I highly encourage everyone to do this. If you have an actual service or a product that you can see people actually using or engaging in, then you should take some time to just go someplace and watch. See what people do. See how they interact with things, right? Because we have sometimes assumptions as to how things operate, and we don't always know, right? Or we might have experienced something before and we think that it's the same as it is then, and that changes, right? Sometimes if you go in a grocery store, you see people with like a clipboard, and they don't work there, they don't have the same kind of clothing on as everybody else. And a lot of times what they're doing is they're people who are observing individuals as they're going to the grocery store, right? What's the average amount of time somebody stands in front of the freezer before they select an item? What's the average amount of number of items in a cart? Like how do people sort of funnel through the grocery store? Like there are all these different kinds of things that pop up that people are looking at and thinking about that you want to make sure that you kind of have an understanding of. So if you are a nonprofit that does something where you can actually see people in the same kind of space, not necessarily using your product or service, but something that's similar, you want to be able to go and take a look at it. Same thing if you're a for-profit business and you're working on something. Okay, the last one is a focus group. So I traditionally say go and do one-on-one interviews, get information back. And what happens is sometimes people will say, well, I'm short on time, So instead of doing one-on-one interviews, I'm literally just going to go and make it so that I spend a bunch of time with one large group, right? And that is a little bit challenging because if you're not sort of skilled in managing a focus group, then you kind of get to the point to where it's a little tough. And the most dominant voice in the room might win out. People might be less likely to share their information or details about things. And so that's a little bit of a challenge. All right. Go to the next slide, please. All right. So somebody's before, okay, well, where do you find information or details about people to do sort of donor or customer interviews? There's a lot of different places that you could find people that are based on sort of what they do or what they kind of have. LinkedIn is a great one for both for-profit and nonprofit to find individuals who might have experience in spaces that you want to be able to reach out to. For those folks that haven't used sort of the foundation directory online, Candid, that's a great space. I mentioned the IRS because basically for every nonprofit, they have to file 990s. And so you can actually get that information. Actually, most of that funnels into Candid if you have access to it. And you can pull that information because it has to be public record, right? The whole point is that they actually are able to do that because, you know, they have nonprofit status. But then there are other spaces, right? Online, Instagram, Eventbrite or Meetup to actually go to spaces where individuals are actually operating. I know here they have like, you know, nonprofit leaders get together and go on like hikes, right? So if you're interested in finding out about that, or there's specific affinity groups for organizations, or there's people who just like a particular product or service, right? So you can get creative and then being able to reach out to folks to make sure that you have a really good understanding of those things. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second. And then there's about 3 or 4 more slides. I'll talk about the things and we'll wrap up really quickly. So any questions about any of the stuff that I just mentioned in terms of doing the interviews? I'm going to talk about how you actually get some of the questions around those things. Okay. So Meetup is basically people can organize events, right? So if you have a group of people who are into education technology, they can just organize a meetup, and it's kind of like Eventbrite, but it's a little bit more informal. And normally they don't cost, so they're not a charged events. Okay, I know it's a lot of information, but let me know if you have any sort of other questions about that as we keep going. All right, go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there's a couple of different areas and tools for going through sort of interviewing and how do you interview people. These are just 3. There's many more that people kind of get into. I'm not going to go into detail in many of these. The one that I'll focus on after this is a little bit the interview script. So how can you make sure you have the appropriate questions? But I did want to explain a little bit about it, right? So sketching is just like it sounds, right? It's asking people to provide things like that people need to sort of go through for quick visualizations of ideas and concepts. Journey mapping is basically laying out the journey from one side to sort of the other, right? So it could be a physical journey or it could be just a process journey, and then the interview script. And I'm being told that we have to stop, so I can stop there if you like. And then you guys can get the slides, and then there's the interview script as well, which has some questions as a whole. But I think that is my time.
No, I've definitely, this was a great conversation, and I think a lot of people got a lot from it. I just wanted to take them a moment for people to actually come in screen and have a little chat and talk with you directly. I know we only have about like 10 more minutes left, but I wanted to give the time for the audience to ask any questions that they may have and chat with you directly. So give me one moment. So at this time, I'm also going to put like I know you mentioned surveys, and I know it can be pretty cumbersome of people completing surveys, but our hope is that you please complete the survey for this workshop today and let us know how Alex did. I thought you were great, and honestly, I learned much about I learned a lot just about like customer discovery and really thinking deeply about like who my like customers are as a nonprofit. You're right. I do have like the funders who fund the work that we do, as well as the people that we serve. A lot of the people that we serve are also youth. And then so it's like, are we marketing to youth or are we marketing to parents? So it was just a lot for me personally to think about, and I really appreciate it. Let me see how I bring people into the screen. Let me see. Here we go.
So thank you, everyone. Then please definitely, I think you're pulling up the survey to send the link to folks. So you want to make sure that you get the information back, right? One of the things that's is like, obviously it's an opportunity for folks to provide this to you, and so for the the folks with the Prep Institute and Black Tech Link, they do a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of working with the county, but we want to make sure that there is that feedback because they need it. So make sure that you fill out your survey. So.
Natasha, did you want to add anything?
I think you're muted.
Thank you. I think you did an outstanding job. I love the engagement and the critical information that you shared. It's like, the steps that you take to really be able to do your customer acquisition and the components of being able to do that. So thank you so much. I think Davina has a question. Do you suggest interviewing professional networks?
It depends. So if you former supervisors and coworkers, so that can be a little bit of a challenge. But sure, I think you just have to make sure that the questions that you ask and how you structure them are really curated in a way that takes a little bit of the ambiguity out of stuff, right? And so one of the things I was talking about before is like the best thing that you can do if you're doing an interview and you're talking to people about their sort of experience with something is to ask them to tell you a story, right? Hey, can you tell me about a time, especially you can do the donors as well. Can you tell me about a time that you provided grant dollars for an organization, right? What was the process that you went through to identify which organizations that you're going to provide capital to? Or like, and so making sure that people are really eliciting stories, because there's a lot that happens in a story that is a little bit different than if I just ask you, do you fund someone or not? Do you fund STEM education programs? I say yes or no. Well, yeah, I fund them. But I really want to know, it's like, how do you pick them? How do you determine, who's better or worse? How do you determine how much money you give them? Right? There's a lot of unknowns that you want to make sure that you get, especially in the nonprofit space.
So Elizabeth has put the survey in the chat. If you could answer that for us, we really would appreciate it. The county is interested in knowing your feedback about the importance and value of this type of training countywide. Alex, there's another question. Does the Jacobs Center have a program for the Business Accelerator this year?
Oh yeah, so we're actually in our 9th cohort right now, and so we are still operating and running program.
When is the next cohort start, or did the current cohort just start?
We're kind of in the middle of this cohort. So the next one is kind of TBD in terms of the timeline on when we actually wind up starting it.
Okay.
But feel free to reach out. Give my email. And I think it'll be also in the presentation when they send it out on here. It has it, but feel free to drop me a line. If you're local, come by the space. Happy to chat with anybody in more detail about any of this stuff. Right. Our goal in doing this is to make sure that not only businesses, but then also any nonprofits that are around that we can help and we can help support. Right. So if there's things that we can do, don't hesitate to come by and ask us. And we have workshops and we have stuff here as well too.
Wonderful.
All right. Any other questions? I think we have a couple more minutes, and I would love to just answer any questions that I can for folks. And if you have any later, you can email me, you can call me. That's my actual phone number. I do actually pick it up. So, folks like, sometimes that's a weird number. Why you got a 202 number? But I'll talk to folks and help in any way that I can.
Wonderful. This is great. Well, if there's no questions, I want to say thank you for everyone who attended and thank you for staying for the full workshop. I know there was a lot of great information and, I know that there's even more information like regarding customer discovery, which, if you're able to connect with Alex or the Jacob Center Neighborhood for Innovation, there's a lot of resources. We'll be sending out the presentation and the webinar so you can take a look back. We did provide some like resource blogs in the presentation too that you were able to review, and then they talk a little bit about customer discovery. And so also our next workshop is next week. And as we talk about customers, our next workshop is going to focus on how to get the government as your customer. So we have a really great presenter next week. We'll talk a little bit about the county as well as how to do business with the state of California. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alex. Natasha, do you want to have any words?
No, just thank you all for coming and participating with us. And I hope that the learning takes your organization further because you deserve it based on the great work you're doing.
Yes, awesome.
How can we sign up for the future workshops?
So if you are a Project Most registrant, you get invited to the workshops. We send out a Google Calendar and then we also send out reminders. So if you received an invite for this workshop, you'll receive them for the next workshops as well. Awesome. All right. Well, everyone have a great day, a great holiday weekend, and we look forward to next week. Thank you.
Happy weekend, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Let me stop recording.